The scream hit the air before anyone understood what was happening. On a cold Midwestern night, two women were locked in a frantic argument on a 90-foot bridge. Hands moving, voices shaking, footsteps shifting on slick concrete. One was 7 months pregnant, the other had spent her entire life protecting her. In one chaotic blur of emotion, a hand rose, a slip followed, and a body toppled over the railing, disappearing into the darkness below. By the time the echoes settled, only Lex Hart remained standing, frozen in shock, staring at the water as if her entire world had just been swallowed whole. But moments like this don't erupt out of nowhere. They build slowly, quietly, through years of pressure, buried pain, and choices no one believed would matter. And to understand this fall, this heartbreaking, irreversible second, we have to rewind every step that led these two women to that bridge. Because the truth of that night isn't found in the scream, it's found in everything that came before it. Before we go any further, before we retrace the moments that led to that night, welcome to Crime Deck, where we bring you daily true crime stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Thank you to everyone who supports this channel. If you find our deep dives as gripping as we do, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new case. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a warning. Now, let's go back to how this nightmare began. Lex Hart grew up in a neighborhood where everything felt neatly arranged. Sidewalks straight as rulers, houses sitting in tight rows, families waving from manicured yards as if they were performing for each other. Inside the Hart home, discipline ruled everything. Alarms went off at the same time every morning. Dinner hit the table by 6. Lex learned early how to move quietly, how to keep her emotions tucked in, how to earn praise without ever asking for it. Her father valued order. Her mother valued achievement. There wasn't much room left for softness. Lex adapted. She followed every rule placed in front of her because breaking them never felt like an option. Across town, Mara Lewis grew up in a world that ran on a different rhythm entirely. She lived with her single mother in a small apartment with loud neighbors, peeling paint, and a refrigerator that buzzed like it was arguing with itself. Her mother worked night shifts and came home smelling like disinfectant and fatigue. Mara learned how to pack her own lunches, handle her own homework, and put herself to bed when her mother couldn't stay awake. Life demanded maturity from her long before she understood the weight of it. But despite everything, Mara kept a gentleness that made people feel seen. She felt everything deeply: joy, hurt, hope, disappointment. It all lived close to the surface with her. They met in 2nd grade by accident. Mara sat alone at lunch, pushing carrots around her tray. Lex, who usually stuck to her quiet routines, noticed her sitting there and walked over. No big speech, no dramatic moment, just Lex sliding half her sandwich across the table and saying, "You want some?" That tiny gesture cracked open something between them. Curiosity for Lex, relief for Mara. They didn't know it then, but that moment would shape the rest of their childhoods. Soon, everything became a shared experience. After-school walks turned into slow, rambling conversations about teachers and parents and the weirdness of growing up. Lex taught Mara how to organize her notebooks so she didn't lose everything. Mara taught Lex how to breathe, how to laugh without checking if anyone was watching. At sleepovers, they whispered about things they didn't dare say out loud. Fears, secrets, dreams that felt too big for their age. When Mara cried over her mother missing another school event, Lex sat beside her without judgment or pity, just presence. And when Lex's father snapped at her for slipping a single grade point, Mara held her hand and said, "You're enough. You know that, right?" Neither girl heard those words often. They clung to them when they did. Elementary school drifted into middle school, and the world around them started getting louder. Cliques formed. Friendships shifted. Kids started caring about clothes, popularity, and who said what behind whose back. Lex struggled with the social part of it. She wasn't flashy, didn't chase attention, didn't know how to bend her personality just to fit in. Mara did her best to adapt, but her heart bruised easily. A single insult could derail her entire day. Whenever one of them cracked under the pressure, the other stepped in. They didn't judge each other's weaknesses. They balanced them. The first heartbreaks hit in 8th grade. Lex liked a boy who barely knew she existed. Mara liked a boy who noticed her too much and then ignored her when his friends made fun of him. They sat together after school, eating vending machine snacks, trying to figure out what love was supposed to feel like. Lex analyzed everything. Mara felt everything, and somehow that made them stronger. By high school, their differences only deepened. Lex threw herself into academics, honor classes, debate club, anything that kept her on the right track. Her parents adored the routine of it. Mara drifted toward creative electives, choir, drama, art. She didn't always excel, but she poured her heart into every performance, every project. Lex took pride in her precision. Mara took pride in her expression. The world tried to separate them with labels, but they refused to let it. They built their teenage years together. Friday night football games, late night study sessions, whispered conversations in hallways about boys who didn't deserve them. Mara borrowed Lex's clothes for school dances. Lex let Mara do her makeup, even though she hated sitting still. When Mara had to work part-time jobs to help her mom with bills, Lex covered study groups and projects so Mara could keep her grades afloat. When Lex cried quietly after her father criticized her again, Mara pulled her into the girls' bathroom and said, "You're allowed to be human, you know." They became each other's compass. Lex kept Mara grounded when the world felt unstable. Mara kept Lex soft when the world felt unkind. No one questioned their closeness. Teachers paired them automatically. Friends included one when they invited the other. They were a package deal, unmistakably bonded by a history built from small moments no one else witnessed. High school graduation felt like the end of one life and the start of another. They stood side by side in their caps and gowns, clutching hands as if adulthood might try to pull them apart before they were ready. Mara cried first, of course. Lex held back until the moment hit her in the chest, the realization that childhood was gone for good. They promised right there on that football field that no matter what came next, they would stay connected. Not just as friends, not just as history, but as the one person each knew they could fall apart in front of without judgment. When college acceptance letters started rolling in, life surprised them in the best possible way. Lex got into her first choice university, no shock to anyone who knew her. Mara, after weeks of doubting every decision she'd ever made, opened her own letter and found the name of the exact same school printed in bold at the top. She screamed. Lex laughed. Her parents nodded with pride. Mara's mother hugged her so tight she couldn't breathe. For the first time, both girls felt like life wasn't dragging them apart. It was giving them one more chapter together. They spent that summer planning everything: dorm shopping, class schedules, rides to campus, promises that they'd stick together through anything college threw at them. They walked into freshman orientation just as they had walked through childhood, side by side, hopeful, overwhelmed, and convinced that whatever came next, they were ready for it. College didn't pull Lex and Mara apart the way everyone expected it to. It stretched them, yes, gave them different schedules, different dorms, different responsibilities, but the thread between them stayed tight. Lex arrived on campus with a folder full of goals and a mind trained to perform. She mapped out her semesters before they even began. She woke up early, took notes like her life depended on it, and tried to outrun the pressure her parents had quietly placed on her shoulders her entire childhood. Every test score mattered. Every internship mattered. Every mistake felt like a step backward. Mara walked into college with hope in her eyes and uncertainty under her feet. She switched majors faster than she switched hairstyles. Business one semester, psychology the next, photography after that. She was trying to find herself, trying to figure out what she was good at, who she wanted to be, where she fit in a world suddenly bigger than anything she grew up knowing. And every time she got lost, she called Lex, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, sometimes saying nothing at all. Lex always picked up. The first wave of emotional turbulence hit when Mara fell for a junior with an easy smile and a talent for making promises he didn't plan to keep. He charmed her, pulled her in, and then disappeared for 3 days without explanation. When he returned, he blamed stress, homework, his ex, anything that made Mara excuse him. Lex hated him instantly. She didn't say it out loud, but she didn't need to. Mara heard it in her silence. Still, Mara stayed in that relationship until the night she showed up at Lex's dorm, shaking, mascara smeared, whispering, "He said I'm too much." Lex didn't lecture. She didn't judge. She wrapped Mara in a blanket, put her phone away, and let her cry until morning. That moment became the rhythm of their early college years. Mara stepping into painful relationships, Lex pulling her back out, both learning what young adulthood feels like when the world stops protecting you. Meanwhile, Lex worked herself into exhaustion. She juggled classes, part-time jobs, and extracurriculars that looked impressive on paper, but drained her daily. She didn't complain. She just kept working. She held herself to standards no one told her she had to meet, but she believed were required. And when she broke down from stress, alone, quiet, trying to hide it, Mara was the one who noticed. Mara dragged her out of her routine, forced her to breathe, reminded her she wasn't a machine. They balanced each other like that, one falling apart, the other stepping in. Year after year, life kept testing them. Finances hit hard. Mara's family couldn't always cover bills, so she bounced between campus jobs. Library assistant, dining hall cashier, late-night desk clerk. Each job wore her out, but she kept going because she never wanted to call home and ask for help her mother didn't have. Lex sometimes slipped her money from her own paycheck, telling Mara it was extra financial aid she didn't need. Mara never questioned it. She just said thank you with a soft smile that held more truth than words could. Then there were the breakups. Mara's relationships kept turning into warnings. One boyfriend lied, one cheated, one used her softness like a tool. Lex stayed steady for every heartbreak. She picked Mara up from dark parking lots, from parties that turned bad, from dorm lounges where Mara sat waiting for men who never showed. And when Lex finally got into her own relationship, a quiet guy from her economics class, Mara returned the favor. She encouraged Lex to date, to breathe, to let someone take care of her for once. But that relationship ended after a few months when he told Lex, "You're too focused. I can't keep up." She didn't cry about it, not in front of anyone, but Mara could see the bruise it left beneath her calm exterior. They went through identity crises too, those moments when life felt too big and everything felt too confusing. Lex questioned whether she was working towards something she genuinely wanted or simply something expected. Mara questioned if she would ever find something she could truly excel in, something that made her feel whole. But whenever they spiraled, they found each other again in the middle. Two girls sitting on a dorm floor, eating cheap pizza, talking about dreams they still believed in. Their friendship matured in those years. It wasn't the childhood version anymore. It wasn't built on playground promises. It was built on shared survival, on nights where they stayed up until sunrise talking about the futures they hoped would come, on mornings where they dragged each other to class despite exhaustion, on afternoons where they helped each other fill out forms, applications, resumes, and all the paperwork that came with becoming adults. By their final year, the world had shaped them in different ways. Lex had become stronger, sharper, more determined. Mara had become softer, wiser, more aware of her own patterns. But they were still tethered, still choosing each other, still believing that whatever came next, jobs, relationships, moves, they would face it together. College taught them how to grow, but it also taught them how it feels when life doesn't go the way you plan. And even in the years when everything felt uncertain, one thing stayed solid. Lex and Mara always found their way back to each other. Lex met Daniel Hart on a night she didn't even want to attend. It was a friend's engagement party, one of those events filled with small talk, loud music, and couples clinking glasses as if love lived in the air itself. Lex stood near the back, holding a drink she didn't really want, pretending to be interested in conversations she barely heard. She felt tired, tired of school, tired of adulthood, tired of being the strong one all the time. And then she turned around and Daniel was standing there like he had stepped into the room just to talk to her. He didn't come in loud or pushy. He didn't flirt with cheesy lines. He simply smiled, calm, steady, warm, and said, "I've seen you 3 times and somehow never managed to introduce myself." Lex laughed, surprised at how natural it felt to talk to him. Something in his presence softened the tension she always carried in her shoulders. She didn't feel judged. She didn't feel like she had to perform. She felt noticed, in a way she hadn't felt in years. Daniel made conversation easy. He asked about her major, her goals, the things she hoped to do after college. He listened, actually listened, like her words mattered. And when Lex flipped the question back on him, he answered with a confidence that came from knowing exactly where he wanted his life to go. He had plans, direction, ambition, and a calmness that made Lex feel safe. She wasn't used to that. She didn't realize how much she needed it. Their first date came a week later. Daniel picked her up on time, opened the car door for her, and took her to a restaurant she had always driven past but never stepped into because it felt too nice. He didn't rush her. He didn't talk over her. He didn't treat her like she was lucky to be there. He treated her like she belonged. That night, Lex caught herself smiling in a way she hadn't since high school. Mara noticed the change immediately. Mara loved seeing Lex happy. She saw how Daniel pulled Lex's laughter out of hiding. She saw the way Lex checked her phone more often, hoping for his messages. She watched her friend approach love differently, carefully but with a softness that had been missing for too long. Mara encouraged it with her whole heart. She wanted Lex to feel chosen, cherished, held. Daniel seemed to do that without effort. As the relationship deepened, Daniel began showing up in all the ways Lex didn't know she needed. He cooked dinner for her after long days. He sent flowers to her apartment just because. He reminded her to rest when she tried to run through exhaustion. He gave her security, a safe place to land. Lex had grown up in a home where emotions were managed, not shared. Daniel gave her space to be human. Mara became the third piece of their little world without anyone forcing it. Daniel included her in group outings, listened to her stories, treated her with kindness that made her feel valued instead of burdensome. For the first time in a long time, Lex felt like life made sense. School was stressful, adulthood was messy, but Daniel brought balance. He became the stability Lex had been chasing for years. Months passed, and their love only strengthened. Daniel didn't rush things, but he didn't waste time either. He knew what he wanted. One evening, he asked Lex to meet him on a rooftop restaurant downtown. She thought it was just a nice date night, but when she walked out and saw candles, flowers, and Daniel standing there with that same steady smile from the engagement party, her breath caught in her throat. He didn't give a long speech. He simply took her hands and said, "I want to build my life with you." And that was all Lex needed. She said yes before he even finished asking. She cried, laughed, and held on to him like her heart finally had a home. Mara was the first person she called. Mara screamed through the phone. She told Lex she deserved every part of this moment, and she meant it. The wedding came months later, and it was beautiful in a way that felt almost unreal. Fairy lights hung from wooden beams. Soft music filled the room. Lex walked down the aisle in a dress that made her look like the version of herself she always dreamed she could be. Calm, confident, loved. Daniel cried when he saw her. Mara stood beside her as maid of honor, her eyes filled with pride and joy. For that entire day, everything in Lex's world felt exactly right. After the wedding, life settled into a warm, steady rhythm. They moved into a cozy starter home, a place with real hardwood floors, a tidy little yard, and enough room to imagine a future. Daniel worked a stable job that paid well. Lex started hers with determination. Mara visited often, filling the house with laughter and stories. The three of them fit together easily, naturally, like pieces of a life that had been waiting to align. For years, Lex believed she had stepped into her blessing season. A kind husband, a warm home, a best friend who stood beside her even through adulthood. Lex finally felt safe enough to hope for more, maybe even a family of her own. And for a while, life gave her every reason to believe those hopes were real. Lex didn't expect trying for a baby to feel like stepping into a whole new version of herself. She entered it with hope. Soft, excited hope that made her hum in the kitchen while she cooked. Hope that made her rest her hand on her stomach like she was already imagining a heartbeat there. Daniel kissed her forehead more, held her a little tighter at night, and told her he couldn't wait to be a father. Their home carried a kind of quiet glow in those early months. They bought baby books. They counted fertile days. They joked about baby names. Everything felt possible. And then just as quickly, hope cracked. The first miscarriage blindsided her. One moment she felt fine. The next she was sitting in a sterile exam room, trying to understand words she never thought would apply to her. Miscarriage. Tissue loss. Try again. The doctor spoke gently, but the words hit her like cold water. Lex nodded as if she understood. But inside, she felt like the ground had opened under her feet. Daniel held her hand on the ride home, but he stared out the window too long, blinked too slowly, breathed too carefully, as if even his own emotions had to be controlled. Lex tried again, because that's what people do. They get up. They hope again. She told herself the first one was a fluke, a medical glitch, something her body would fix the next time. But the next time didn't give her a victory. It gave her another loss. The second miscarriage didn't just hurt, it stunned her. She sat on the bathroom floor, hands shaking, whispering, "Please, not again," even though she already knew the answer. She called Daniel, and he drove home in silence. He didn't comfort her with words. He didn't break down with her either. He placed a blanket around her shoulders, helped her into bed, and sat there looking helpless in a way that felt heavy rather than reassuring. The third loss broke something in her spirit. She was tired, truly tired. Tired of hoping, tired of checking calendars, tired of waking up every morning wondering if her body was working with her or against her. The injections burned. The pills made her nauseous. The test brought more fear than excitement. The whole process began to swallow her days, her sense of worth, and the stability she believed her marriage had. Daniel wasn't cruel. He didn't yell or blame her, but each loss pushed him further into emotional retreat. He stopped joining her at appointments. He stopped talking about baby names. He stopped reaching for her in bed. He offered silence instead of comfort, distance instead of reassurance. And Lex, who was already grieving what she couldn't carry, now felt like she was losing pieces of her marriage at the same time. Mara stepped in without being asked. She knocked on Lex's door on the days she knew grief would hit hardest. She held Lex through sobs that came out in broken waves. She brought soup, folded laundry, and sat with her on the couch during nights when Lex didn't trust herself to be alone. She didn't try to fix anything. She didn't offer empty advice. She simply said, "I'm here," and stayed long enough for the house to feel less heavy. Every appointment Lex couldn't walk into alone, Mara went with her. She sat through ultrasounds that showed nothing but empty space. She listened to doctors explain hormonal treatments, injections, and next steps Lex no longer had the strength to ask about. She held Lex's hand when the nurses inserted needles. She rubbed Lex's back when she cried in the car afterward, and she held back her own tears so Lex wouldn't feel guilty for the weight she carried. Meanwhile, Lex navigated a new kind of loneliness. It wasn't the quiet emptiness of someone being physically gone. It was the kind of loneliness that comes from standing next to someone who feels emotionally out of reach. Daniel's silence pressed on her like a wall. When she tried to talk about her fear that maybe her body couldn't do this, fear that maybe she wasn't enough, he said things like, "Let's not talk about it right now," or "We'll see what the doctor says." He didn't mean to hurt her, but his detachment left her feeling stranded. Lex began to question everything: her body, her marriage, her faith in a future she used to see clearly. She walked around with grief packed into every breath, every step, every decision. But she kept going. She kept trying. And Mara kept standing beside her, steady, warm, reliable in a way that reminded Lex of who she used to be before the losses reshaped her. The fourth miscarriage nearly unmade her. She felt her body give out before she even reached the clinic. The doctor confirmed what she already sensed, and Lex didn't cry right away. She sat still, hands clenched, eyes glassy, as if her emotions were waiting for permission to fall apart. When she got home, she walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and collapsed on the floor. She couldn't catch her breath. She couldn't say Daniel's name. She couldn't pretend she still had hope. Mara found her hours later, curled up, barely speaking. She wrapped her arms around her, whispering, "You're not alone. You're not alone," over and over until Lex loosened her grip on the pain long enough to breathe again. Those months tested every part of who Lex thought she was. She felt broken. She felt angry. Angry at her body. Angry at fate. Angry at the silence inside her home. But she also felt gratitude. quiet and deep, for the friend who refused to let her drown. Lex didn't know what would come next. She didn't have the strength to plan beyond the next sunrise. All she knew was this: she was tired, she was grieving, and she was clinging to the pieces of her life that hadn't yet slipped through her fingers. And for the first time in her marriage, the person holding her together wasn't her husband, it was Mara. Before we move deeper into Lex's story, take a moment to support this channel. Hit the notification bell, subscribe to Crime Deck, and share this video with someone who follows cases like this. Your engagement helps us keep bringing you real stories with the depth and clarity they deserve. And now, let's stop and consider something. What happens to a marriage when grief becomes bigger than the love that once held it together? It's a question many couples never expect to face, yet it became the turning point in Lex's life. Daniel didn't start talking to Mara with bad intentions. It happened the same way emotional trouble always slips into a marriage. Quietly, slowly, through cracks no one expected to matter. At first, he reached out to her because he didn't know how to reach his own wife anymore. Lex spent her nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, her body recovering from loss after loss. She cried softly in the bathroom when she thought he was asleep. She moved gently, spoke gently, lived gently, like being too loud might shatter whatever little strength she had left. Daniel didn't know what to do with a woman who hurt so deeply. He felt powerless. He felt like every time he tried to help, he made things worse. And instead of walking toward Lex, he walked sideways, toward Mara, the only other person who loved Lex as much as he did. The first conversation between them was harmless. Mara stopped by to check on Lex, found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table staring at a mug that had gone cold, and asked him how he was holding up. He laughed, the kind of laugh people give when they're trying not to break. "I don't know what to say to her," he admitted. "I don't know how to help her." Mara sat down across from him. Let him talk. Let him breathe. She assured him he wasn't failing. She told him Lex still loved him, and Daniel listened with exhaustion in his eyes. One conversation became two. Two became five. Soon Mara stayed longer after checking on Lex, just to see how Daniel was handling things. She asked about his day. He asked about hers. They shared thoughts they didn't intend to share, thoughts they didn't realize were too intimate until they were already out in the open. Mara told him about her worries, about how helpless she felt watching Lex fall apart. Daniel confessed he felt like a guest in his own marriage, like grief had moved in and pushed him out. And Mara listened. She always listened. Curiosity settled into their interactions. A small, quiet curiosity that neither of them addressed, but both of them felt. Daniel started texting her when Lex fell asleep. "Rough day," he'd write. Mara answered because she cared. She cared about Lex. She cared about the marriage. She cared about stability. But she also cared about Daniel. Too much, too soon, without meaning to. Empathy pulled her deeper. Daniel's voice carried a sadness she recognized, a loneliness she'd lived through before. Mara always wanted to fix pain, even if the pain didn't belong to her. She showed up for Lex, but she showed up for Daniel too. And the line between comforting a friend and comforting a man inside a failing marriage became thinner than either of them realized. Lex, meanwhile, drifted in and out of emotional fog. Her days blended into doctor visits, blood tests, hormone pills, and long stretches of quiet where she felt like her body and her marriage were slipping away at the same time. She trusted Mara. She trusted Daniel. She trusted the tiny world the three of them had built. She didn't notice the glances passing between them, the soft pauses in conversation, the way Mara sometimes looked at Daniel like she wanted to say something but didn't. Shock crept in. The night Mara stayed later than usual, Lex had finally fallen asleep on the couch after crying through dinner. Daniel and Mara stood in the kitchen again, the air thick with unspoken things. He looked tired, tired in a way that made Mara's chest tighten. She reached out, touched his arm, and said, "You're doing your best." Daniel closed his eyes. "It doesn't feel like it." Something shifted in that moment, something neither of them named. Mara pulled her hand back quickly, but the damage was already done. Both of them knew the contact lasted a second too long. Both pretended it didn't. The next time they were alone, the distance between them felt charged. Daniel opened up about things he hadn't told Lex, How he feared becoming a father, how he feared failing as a husband, how the house didn't feel like a home anymore. Mara opened up about feeling helpless, about wanting to carry everyone's pain without breaking. Their conversations filled voids that loneliness had carved wide open. The pain of it all created a dangerous kind of closeness. And once dependency takes root, restraint becomes harder to hold. One evening, Mara dropped by after work. Lex was upstairs resting. Daniel was in the living room. They talked again, too softly, too intimately. He admitted he didn't remember the last time Lex looked at him without sadness. Mara's eyes softened. She told him he deserved to feel supported too. They moved closer without noticing how close they were. And then Daniel leaned in, not by accident, not confused, but drawn. Mara didn't pull away. She didn't think. She let him kiss her, just once, but the once carried weight. Hope didn't live in that kiss. Guilt did. But guilt doesn't erase actions. It only makes them quieter. After that, their interactions changed. They didn't jump into a full affair overnight, but the boundary had already been shattered. Texts grew longer. Calls stretched later. They met under the guise of checking on Lex. They shared touches that lasted too long. They built a private world layered behind the world Lex trusted. Pain moved Mara's decisions. Loneliness moved Daniel's. And the two of them fell into something neither planned to start, but neither stopped. The physical relationship emerged slowly, carefully, in stolen moments, where they convinced themselves they weren't crossing a line they'd already crossed. And Lex, exhausted, grieving, searching for comfort, never saw it coming. She trusted them both too deeply. By the time the affair had a pulse, it was too quiet, too deliberate, too wrapped in secrecy for Lex to detect. She believed her husband and her best friend were helping her survive. She didn't know they were also helping each other. Eventually, they stopped asking themselves how far they'd gone. They just kept going. But all of it crashed the morning Mara woke up nauseous. She barely made it to the bathroom. Her hands trembled as she gripped the sink. She blamed stress. She blamed fatigue. But once the nausea returned again and again, she bought a test. And when the second line appeared instantly, dark, bold, undeniable, everything inside her body locked up. She sank to the floor, pressing both hands against her mouth, trying to silence the scream rising from her chest. She didn't want this to be true. She wasn't ready. She couldn't be ready. Not for this. She paced her small apartment, whispering, "No, this can't be happening," like she could argue with biology. But the truth sat in her stomach, steady and sure. She called Daniel first, not Lex. Daniel. He arrived 15 minutes later, breathing fast, eyes wide. Mara handed him the test without speaking. His face drained of color. For a moment, he didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He just stared at the small plastic stick like it was a detonator. Then he grabbed her hands. His voice came low, urgent. "You can't tell Lex. Not now. Not yet." Mara stumbled back. "Daniel, I can't hide this." "You have to," he insisted, stepping closer. "If she finds out, everything falls apart." He told her he had a plan. He told her he was going to divorce Lex. He said it with such confidence, such certainty, that for a minute Mara believed him. He painted a picture, just the two of them, a fresh start, a real family. "I'll take care of you," he promised, "of the baby, of everything. Just give me time." Hope flickered in her chest. Quick, dangerous hope. The kind of hope desperate people cling to before they realize it isn't stable. It's bait. Daniel squeezed her hands, looked her in the eyes, and swore he meant every word. Mara didn't know he had already fed Lex promises of working on their marriage. She didn't know he had no real plan, only excuses wrapped in tenderness. For a short while, Mara tried to believe him. She held on to the idea of a future that wasn't full of fear. She let herself dream of tiny clothes, a nursery, maybe even a new place far from the town where they'd messed everything up. But every dream came with a shadow. Lex's face, Lex's trust, Lex's love. And that's when guilt began slipping under her ribs. She avoided Lex for days, but her silence worried her more. Lex showed up unannounced, brought soup, asked gentle questions. Mara broke quickly under the pressure. She didn't tell the full truth. She couldn't, but she did place the pregnancy test in Lex's hands. Lex froze for a moment, Then she smiled, a real, warm smile Lex hadn't felt in years. She wrapped her arms around Mara and whispered, "You're not alone. You have me." Mara stiffened, shaking with sobs Lex didn't understand. Lex thought they were tears of fear. She didn't know they were tears of shame. From that moment forward, Lex devoted herself to Mara's pregnancy like it was her reason to breathe. She attended appointments, squeezed Mara's hand through ultrasounds, took notes when the doctor spoke, made lists of baby essentials, and showed up at Mara's apartment with bags of groceries and prenatal vitamins. Every kindness broke Mara further. Daniel noticed the closeness between the two women, and it rattled him. His messages to Mara changed, shorter, colder, more frantic. He told her to stay quiet. He reminded her of everything at stake. He repeated that he would leave Lex soon, but the timelines kept shifting. After the holidays, after things calm down, after I figure out how to tell her. He used the baby as leverage, whispering reassurance that felt hollow even as he spoke it. Meanwhile, Mara tried to pull away from him. She ignored his late-night calls. She deleted his long messages before reading them. She avoided being alone with him entirely, not because she didn't care. She cared too much, and the caring was killing her softly. She felt guilt claw at her every time Lex placed a hand on her belly. She felt it when Lex said, "You're going to be such a good mom." She felt it when Lex rubbed her back through morning sickness, when Lex showed up with ginger tea, when Lex pressed her forehead against hers and whispered, "I'm here, always." Lex's love didn't soothe Mara, it shredded her. By the 7th month, the guilt became unbearable. Her belly was round and heavy. Her emotions swung without warning. Sleep became impossible. Food became tasteless. She cried at random moments, unable to explain why. She lived in a body that carried life and a secret capable of destroying the woman she loved most. One night, she sat alone in her apartment, gripping her stomach and sobbing so hard her ribs hurt. She said the words out loud for the first time. "I have to tell her." The truth pressed against her from the inside, literally and emotionally. She could feel it with every kick. She could feel it every time Lex showed up with love that wasn't deserved. She could feel it every time Daniel lied to both of them. She picked up her phone with shaking fingers, dialed Lex's number, waited for her to answer. "Lex, I need to talk to you," she whispered. "Just us." Her voice trembled, her heart pounded, and for the first time since the test turned positive, Mara made the decision to stop hiding. Mara chose the bridge because it was the only place that ever felt honest to them. They'd gone there as teenagers, sat on the railing with their feet dangling, traded secrets, cried over boys, swore they'd never lie to each other. That spot held every version of who they'd been. Maybe that's why Mara went there now, swollen with guilt and 7 months pregnant, pacing back and forth like the concrete itself had become a confession booth. When she called Lex, her voice was trembling. "Can you meet me, please, at the bridge?" Lex didn't hesitate. She drove without thinking, her mind racing through every possibility. Maybe Mara was scared. Maybe she was in pain. Maybe something was wrong with the baby. She parked crooked, stepped out, and saw Mara standing near the railing, shoulders hunched, face streaked with tears. "Mara, what's going on?" Lex asked softly. She walked toward her friend, her steps slow, cautious, worried. Mara wouldn't lift her head at first. She just kept rubbing her stomach, breathing shallow, trying to gather the courage she had run out of weeks ago. Lex stepped beside her, touched her arm. "Talk to me. You're scaring me." Mara's breath broke on the inhale. She looked at Lex like someone looking at the edge of a cliff they never planned to stand on. "Lex, I've done something I never meant to do, and I can't carry it anymore." Her voice sounded like a confession fighting its way through a collapsing chest. Lex frowned, confused and scared. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Just tell me." Mara shook her head. "No, you don't understand. This isn't something you can fix. This is going to break you." She pressed both hands to her face, sobbing into her palms. Lex reached out again, but Mara stepped back, shaking. "Mara, you're scaring me. Just tell me." Her tone cracked, filled with genuine fear. Mara sucked in a shaky breath, and finally spoke the truth she'd been bearing for months. "It's Daniel." Lex froze. Confusion crossed her face first, then disbelief. "What about Daniel?" Mara wiped her tears with trembling hands. "Me and him, it wasn't supposed to happen, Lex. We were hurting. We were stupid. It started after your second, after the hospital. He said he felt alone. I felt alone. We didn't mean for it to keep going, but it did. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Lex stared at her like the ground had tilted beneath her. She blinked slowly, like her brain couldn't process human language anymore. "You're lying," Lex whispered. "Please tell me you're lying." Mara cried harder. "I wish I was." Lex stumbled backward, grabbing the railing for balance. Her chest tightened, breath shortening. "How long?" she choked out. Mara swallowed hard. 2 years. Lex's body went still, completely still, the kind of stillness that comes right before a scream. 2 years, she repeated, her voice barely audible. 2 years, while I was losing. She couldn't finish the sentence. Tears streamed down her face. She looked at Mara like she didn't recognize her anymore. Mara stepped forward desperately. "Lex, I never wanted to hurt you. I swear to God, I didn't know how to stop it. I tried. I tried so many times." Lex lifted her hand. Don't come closer." But Mara was unraveling. She pressed a shaking hand to her belly. "It's his baby," she whispered. "That's what I called you here to say. I'm pregnant with Daniel's baby." The words echoed in the air like a punch thrown in slow motion. Lex's knees buckled. She grabbed the railing again, gasping, trying to steady herself as the world blurred. Betrayal, grief, humiliation, everything slammed into her at once. "You carried that secret while I held your hand at appointments?" she cried. "You let me love you through this? You let me talk to that man every day like he wasn't destroying my life?" Mara sobbed, shaking violently. "Lex, please. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to breathe without you. I didn't want to lose you." Lex moved further back, tears pouring, hands shaking so hard she couldn't hold the railing properly. "You already lost me," she whispered. "You lost me the moment you touched him." The argument escalated, voices trembling, breaths shallow, emotions exploding faster than either woman could contain. Lex stepped back, overwhelmed, trying to create space between them. Mara reached for her, desperate, pleading, stepping forward on shoes slick with dew. "No, Lex. Please just listen. Please." She reached out again. Lex jerked her hands up defensively, pushing Mara's hands away. Not hard, not violent, just panicked. But the concrete beneath Mara's feet was wet. Her heel slipped. Her center of gravity shifted. The world slowed. Mara's arms flailed as she tried to catch herself. Her eyes widened with terror. "Lex!" she cried, but the word broke midair. Lex lunged forward instinctively, reaching out, fingertips brushing Mara's sleeve. But she wasn't fast enough. Mara's body tipped backward over the railing. A scream cut the air. Then gravity took her. Lex froze, staring over the edge as the sound of impact disappeared into the night, swallowed by the water below. 1 second, one slip, one irreversible moment, and suddenly Lex was alone on the bridge, her chest heaving, hands shaking. The echo of Mara's scream still ringing through her bones. The truth wasn't the fall. The truth was everything that came before it. Lex didn't feel her legs when she ran. She didn't feel the cold. She didn't feel the night air biting at her skin. All she felt was the sound, the echo of Mara's scream still ricocheting through her skull. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. She dropped it once, twice, picked it up with trembling fingers, and dialed 911 with a voice that barely worked. "Someone fell. My friend. She fell off the bridge. Please, please hurry," she gasped, breath breaking between words. The operator tried to calm her, tried to get a location, tried to slow her down, but Lex talked in fragments. She paced the railing, leaning over it again and again, searching the black water for any sign of movement. She called Mara's name even though she knew the river couldn't answer. Within minutes, sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights splashed across the bridge, across Lex's face, across the fear that swallowed her whole. Emergency vehicles screeched to a stop. Paramedics jumped out first, followed by firefighters and police officers. Lex backed away from the railing as they rushed past her, ropes and lights and equipment moving in fast, practiced motions. A paramedic grabbed Lex's shoulders. "Ma'am, I need you to take a breath. Were you both up here alone?" Lex nodded wildly, crying so hard her voice hardly made sound. She slipped. I didn't mean. She slipped." Her words tumbled out in pieces. Nothing came out clean. Down below, rescue teams worked in harsh flashes of light. They lowered inflatable rafts. They called for spotlights. The river responded with silence. Lex stared at the water, teeth chattering, hands gripping her own arms as if trying to keep herself from falling apart. Then, after what felt like hours, but could not have been more than 15 minutes, one of the downstream crews shouted. A beam of light halted over a still figure floating near the rocks. The paramedics moved faster. They pulled the body out carefully, silently, as if sound might shatter what was left of the night. Lex saw Mara's hair first, then the swollen stomach, then the limp arm hanging off the stretcher. A sound tore out of Lex, something between a sob and a scream. Her knees gave out. She fell onto the concrete, clutching her chest, shaking uncontrollably. A paramedic ran to her, calling for a blanket, calling for someone to help sit her up. Lex curled forward, pressing her forehead to the ground as if the pavement could absorb her grief. Near the ambulance, a second paramedic checked for a fetal heartbeat out of protocol, even though the stillness already answered the question. The shake of his head was small, respectful, devastating. They zipped the top of the recovery bag halfway, leaving Mara's face uncovered until detectives gave permission to fully secure it. An officer knelt beside Lex. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, I truly am, but I need you to tell me what happened." Lex lifted her head, her vision blurred. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but nothing made sense. Her voice kept cracking as she repeated the same words. She slipped. I tried to grab her, until they became dry whispers. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her heart wouldn't slow down. She could barely force herself to breathe. A paramedic checked her pulse twice because it jumped so fast the monitor didn't track it properly. They wrapped her in a thermal blanket and guided her to sit against the barrier, her eyes locked on the ambulance that held Mara's still body. Then Daniel arrived. His car skidded to a stop behind the police lights. He jumped out, breathless, looking frantic. Too frantic, too dramatic. But the officers didn't know that. They only saw a terrified husband. "Lex!" he shouted, running toward her. "What happened? Oh my God, Lex, what happened?" Lex lifted her head and saw him. For a moment, she looked confused, disoriented, like she couldn't remember how he fit into this moment. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her, pulling her into his chest. She collapsed into the embrace because she had nothing left to stand on. Her entire body shook against him. Daniel held her tightly, rubbing her back, glancing at the paramedics with wide, horrified eyes. "Where's Mara? Is she alive?" "Tell me she's alive," he shouted. His voice cracked perfectly. Grief sharpened into panic. He looked like a devastated friend, maybe even like a guilty man looking for redemption. But no one there knew the difference. A detective approached them. "Sir, we recovered her body. I'm sorry. She didn't make it." Daniel covered his mouth with his hand, shaking his head violently. No. She was pregnant. She was 7 months. This can't be happening." Tears filled his eyes. Real or not, they came fast enough to convince everyone watching. Lex clung to him, sobbing into his shirt. "I didn't mean, Daniel, I didn't mean, she slipped." He stroked her hair, whispering, It's okay. We'll get through this," while his jaw tightened in a way only Mara would have recognized. Detectives escorted Daniel a few feet away for questioning. He wiped his eyes dramatically, answering with a broken voice, painting himself as a man blindsided by tragedy. He explained how close their families were, how much Lex loved Mara, how he rushed over the second he heard. His tone stayed soft. His expression stayed shattered. He performed grief like a well-practiced script. Meanwhile, Lex sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes blank and unfocused. Her hands trembled so violently that a paramedic held them still, just so she wouldn't harm herself. She kept whispering Mara's name, like saying it might undo everything. The night pulsed with chaos. Sirens, radios, flashlights scanning the ground, officers marking evidence, detectives murmuring theories. Every sound pushed Lex deeper into a fog she couldn't escape. By the time they loaded Mara's body into the ambulance, the bridge no longer felt like a place from Lex's childhood. It felt like a crime scene, and Lex's heart sat at the center of it, broken, terrified, and drowning in a night she could never take back. The morning after the fall, investigators spread out across the precinct conference table with files, photographs, and digital logs. The room smelled like burnt coffee and damp jackets, the kind of smell that always clung to cases that landed heavy. They weren't rushing to judgment, not with a pregnant victim, a late-night fall, and a shocked friend at the center of it. Every detective in that room knew the difference between a clean accident and a complicated one, and this case had complications written all over it. Their first task? Rebuild the final 24 hours of Mara Lewis's life. They charted her phone pings, her last calls, the time she left home, and how long she sat at the bridge before Lex arrived. Their timeline showed something interesting. Mara had been there for nearly 40 minutes before she placed that final call. 40 minutes of pacing, 40 minutes of indecision, 40 minutes of preparing to break open a truth that had been crushing her for months. Detectives turned their attention to Lex's statement next. Not the emotional collapse from the night before, but the factual structure underneath it. They studied the timestamps, the distances, the phone logs. Everything aligned with where Lex said she had been and what she had done. There were no gaps, no inconsistencies, no signs she had led Mara anywhere with intent. Her digital footprint matched her words. Then they opened Daniel's file. At first glance, Daniel looked like a grieving husband. Clean image, steady job, polished demeanor. But investigators didn't deal in first glances. They dealt in patterns, and Daniel's patterns looked off. He had shown up at the scene too informed, too quickly emotional, too interested in Lex's reactions rather than Mara's condition. Detectives circled back to his timeline. His story had small inconsistencies, nothing criminal, but enough to raise eyebrows. One investigator wrote a note in the margin of her pad. Why does he insert himself into their emotional dynamic? Phone records answered that question faster than expected. Mara and Daniel's messaging history didn't begin with anything scandalous. It started with checking in on Lex, making sure you're okay, and let me know if she needs anything. But the tone shifted months later. Playful banter appeared between the lines. Private jokes, late-night calls that stretched past an hour. Deleted messages recovered by digital forensics filled in the gaps. Threads that read like a relationship built on loneliness and secrecy, not random emotional venting. Detectives flagged dozens of voice notes too, some short, some shaky, some saved even after Mara tried to delete them. Daniel's tone changed in those recordings. Soft, intimate, heavy with emotion he never showed his wife. It exposed a private world Lex had no idea existed. Next, detectives investigated the apartment Mara moved into. They traced payments back to a secondary account Daniel set up, one Lex didn't know about. Monthly transfers, furniture purchases, security deposits, all tied to him. He wasn't helping a friend. He was funding a second life. This wasn't speculation, it was math. Clean, undeniable math. The deeper investigators went, the clearer the emotional triangle became. And the clearer it became, the more sympathy shifted toward Lex. Every witness they interviewed repeated the same thing. Lex adored Mara. Lex trusted Daniel. Lex would have done anything for them both. When investigators cross-checked bank statements with Daniel's location history, another pattern stood out. Times when he claimed to work late, but his phone sat at the apartment complex Mara lived in. Times when he was supposed to be running errands, but his location pinged near her side of town. There were dozens of overlaps. Detectives began comparing stories. Lex's recollection of the argument matched the investigation's physical evidence. Mara's phone contained drafts of messages she never sent. Some addressed to Lex, some addressed to Daniel, all filled with fear. In one unsent message, Mara wrote, "She doesn't deserve this. She deserves truth. I can't keep lying." Those words hit the investigation team harder than any photo could. Daniel's interviews, however, grew stranger as the hours passed. In his second session, he insisted he barely spoke to Mara in the last few weeks, contradicting recovered text threads showing daily communication. He claimed he barely knew she moved apartments, even though bank transfers tied him directly to her rent. Detectives didn't accuse him directly. They didn't need to. The inconsistencies kept stacking themselves. Investigators pieced together all three perspectives: Lex's heartbreak, Mara's desperation, Daniel's deception. What emerged wasn't a crime of violence. It was a pattern of emotional manipulation so deep it reshaped the entire timeline. The bridge confrontation didn't come from nowhere. It came from months of entanglement, lies, promises Daniel never intended to keep, and guilt Mara could not survive. By week's end, detectives reached their conclusion. Mara's fall aligned with physics, trajectory, and concrete markings. Daniel's betrayal created the conditions that pushed the two women to that point, but he didn't physically cause the fall. Lex didn't either, not intentionally. The evidence showed a defensive gesture, a slip on wet concrete, a tragic loss of balance. The fall was ruled an accident, but the investigation didn't leave Daniel untouched. Detectives noted his deception in their final report, his manipulation, his emotional infidelity, his financial involvement in Mara's living situation, his role in creating the emotional pressure that collapsed on that bridge. None of it was criminal. All of it was catastrophic. When the official ruling came down, accident, no charges. Lex didn't celebrate. She didn't breathe with relief. She didn't feel vindicated. She simply sat in silence, staring at the wall, holding the paperwork that explained the worst night of her life in simple clinical language. And in the quiet that followed, the weight of Daniel's lies finally landed, not in the courtroom, not on the bridge, but in Lex's understanding of the life she had been living. The verdict didn't arrive with dramatic music or packed courtrooms. It came quietly through paperwork, signatures, and a short meeting in an office where the blinds were half closed. The detective looked at Lex with the kind of soft expression officers reserve for people who survived something they didn't deserve. Lex, the case is officially closed. You're cleared. The words hung in the air like they didn't know where to land. Lex blinked slowly, as if waiting for a second sentence, something that explained how she was supposed to feel now. Relief didn't hit her. Nothing hit her. She sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap, her mind replaying the bridge, the scream, the slip, the way the world swallowed her best friend in a single second. Across from her, the detective continued. Surveillance confirms your arrival time. Phone records support your account. The physical evidence matches your statement. This was a tragic accident. Lex nodded, not because she disagreed, but because her throat wouldn't let words out. Accident. The word felt too small for the weight she carried. The detective cleared his throat. There's more you should know. He slid a separate stack of documents toward her. Legal filings, charges being processed. Daniel's being charged, he said. Financial fraud, misuse of marital assets, falsifying documents, obstruction during the investigation. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. We couldn't charge him for Mara's death. Nothing supports direct involvement, but we are charging him for everything else we uncovered. Lex stared at Daniel's name on the paperwork. Her stomach twisted, her breath shortened. She didn't feel satisfaction. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt tired, deeply, profoundly tired. Do you want to press additional charges? The detective asked gently. Lex shook her head. No. Her voice finally found its way out, shaky but steady. I want this to end. The detective nodded. It will. Soon. Leaving the precinct that day felt surreal. The sun looked too bright. The world too loud. Cars passed normally. People walked their dogs. Kids ate ice cream on the sidewalk. Life continued, completely unaware that hers had split down the middle. She drove home slowly, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to ache. Stepping into the house felt wrong, like walking into a life she no longer belonged to. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked into the bedroom, opened the drawer where she kept important documents, and pulled out the folder holding her marriage certificate. By evening, she had already contacted an attorney. There was no hesitation, no back and forth. No, maybe this can be fixed. Lex filed for divorce quietly, firmly, like the paperwork itself was a lifeline out of the wreckage Daniel built around her. Within days, she packed her essentials, clothes, toiletries, a few sentimental items that didn't trigger pain. She left the wedding photos on the walls, the furniture they picked together, the home they once imagined raising children in. She walked away with the only thing still hers, her sanity. Friends helped her settle into a small apartment across town. The place was simple, bare-walled, quiet. It wasn't much, but it felt safe. It felt like air returning to her lungs after months of suffocating. And for the first time in a long time, Lex could breathe without explaining herself. In the weeks that followed, Lex moved through life with the numbed heaviness grief creates. She learned how to drink coffee alone again, how to sleep without nightmares, how to sit in silence without spiraling. The ultrasound photo Mara had given her stayed tucked in a book she couldn't bring herself to open. She kept replaying conversations in her mind, signs she missed, moments she trusted too deeply, love she gave too freely. She didn't hate Mara. She didn't forgive Daniel. She simply mourned, deeply, privately, honestly. Months later, she finally returned to the bridge. It was early morning, the world washed in a pale, quiet light. Lex walked to the railing with slow, deliberate steps. The breeze curled around her. The river below moved steadily, carrying its currents without apology. Lex placed a bouquet of white lilies on the railing, Mara's favorite. She rested her hands beside them, staring down at the water. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice cracked. Tears blurred the edges of the riverbank. "I'm sorry for everything you carried. I'm sorry for everything you hid. I'm sorry I didn't see how much you were hurting." She didn't blame Mara anymore. Mara lived with emotions that drowned her long before the river ever did. And Daniel fed those emotions until they became impossible to contain. Lex exhaled shakily. "I forgive you," she whispered, and she meant it. Not because the pain had faded, but because holding on to it kept her chained to a night she could never undo. She looked out at the river one last time. The water kept moving, carrying everything it touched forward. Lex wiped her face, took a deep breath, and turned to leave. Her steps were slow but steady, steps of a woman walking out of the darkest chapter of her life. The story didn't end with dramatic justice. It ended with something more human. A woman rebuilding her life after losing the two people she trusted most. A woman learning to live again. A woman finally understanding the truth. Secrets don't just break hearts, they break worlds. In the end, there were no villains drawn in black and white. Just three people whose hearts cracked in different ways, whose choices tangled into a knot none of them could ever untie. Lex didn't walk away with victory. Daniel didn't walk away with love. Mara didn't walk away at all. And that's the hardest truth in stories like this. Nobody wins. Everyone bleeds. Lex will spend years rebuilding a life that should have never been shattered. She'll relearn trust, relearn peace, relearn the sound of her own voice without Mara's next to it. And somewhere in that quiet, she'll come to accept something she never asked for. Some endings don't come with closure. They come with scars. And scars don't disappear. They simply teach us how to keep living with them. Before we close this chapter, thank you for being here with us. If this story moved you, taught you, or made you pause for a moment, take a second to like this video, subscribe to Crime Deck, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our deep dive cases. And if you know someone who values true stories told with honesty and respect, share this video with them. Every share helps us keep bringing you powerful stories that deserve to be heard. Secrets don't always explode. Most of the time, they drip. One lie, one compromise, one blurred boundary at a time, until the truth becomes too heavy for anyone to carry. This tragedy didn't happen in a single night. It happened in the quiet moments no one paid attention to. The overlooked warning signs, the unspoken fears, the misplaced trust, and it leaves us with a question worth sitting with. How many lives would be saved if we told the truth the first moment it hurt, instead of waiting until it destroyed everything we loved?